He built America's entire financial system from scratch. And yet, he died broke, bleeding out on a dueling ground. Alexander Hamilton wasn't a president. He wasn't born rich. He was an immigrant orphan who rose from nothing to shape a nation. His life was brilliant, controversial, and tragically short, a story of ambition, scandal, and legacy that refuses to die. But before the duels, before the politics, before the power, there was an island, small, humid, barely a speck on the map, and on that forgotten piece of earth, history's sharpest mind was born into nothing. Nevis, British West Indies, mid-18th century, a place of sugar, storms, and survival. Alexander Hamilton's very birth is a mystery. Some records say 1755, others 1757. Even he seemed unsure, or maybe he wanted to forget. What we know is this: he was born illegitimate, the child of a broken marriage and scandal. In that world, being born outside the law wasn't just a label, it was a life sentence. It meant whispers in the street. It meant doors closing before you ever knocked. It meant shame you didn't earn but were forced to carry. His father, James Hamilton, struggled to provide. His mother, Rachel Fawcett, was resourceful but trapped. Poverty wrapped around the family like the island's humidity, and then, one by one, everything fell apart. At around 11, James abandoned them. 2 years later, Rachel died of fever, leaving Alexander and his brother orphans. Just like that, the fragile safety net was gone. No inheritance, no title, no family, just a skinny boy with a mind that refused to break and a pen that would change history. Working as a clerk for a trading firm on St. Croix, Hamilton's world became ledgers, ships, and sugar. It wasn't glamorous, but for a hungry mind, it was gold. He learned the mechanics of global finance before most boys his age could sign their own name. By 15, he was trusted to run the business when the owner was away. Then came the storm. In 1772, a hurricane ripped through the Caribbean. Buildings collapsed, ships sank, lives shattered. And in the aftermath, young Hamilton wrote about it. His letter wasn't just a report, it was art. Poetic, fierce, filled with insight far beyond his years. The island's leaders read it and were stunned. Who is this boy? His words carried weight. They started whispering, then they started acting. They raised money, impoverished people pooling what they could to send this orphan to America, because even in darkness, genius glows. That fall, Alexander Hamilton boarded a ship with nothing but his mind and the hope of strangers. He left the Caribbean behind. He was barely 16. He was about to change everything. New York City, chaos, opportunity, fire. For a boy who came from the edge of the map, the American colonies were overwhelming. Streets crowded with merchants, churches, ships, and revolution. Hamilton devoured books like a starving man: law, philosophy, economics, political theory. But learning wasn't enough. He wanted to speak, to write, to shape the world. When tensions with Britain reached a boiling point, Hamilton stepped into the fire. He wrote political essays so sharp and logical that readers assumed they were the work of an experienced scholar. When they found out it was a teenager, they couldn't believe it. Soon, he was giving speeches in public squares, fiery and fearless. He drilled with a militia in a churchyard graveyard at dawn, training for war before most of his peers had finished breakfast. He raided British cannons under fire. He wasn't just a writer anymore, he was a soldier. And then, Washington noticed. General George Washington, commander of the Continental Army, saw in Hamilton something rare: brilliance under pressure. At barely 20, Hamilton was pulled from the battlefield and placed in Washington's inner circle. His pen became a weapon sharper than any sword. He drafted orders, wrote to Congress, and held the fragile army together with ink and determination. But Hamilton was restless. He didn't just want to write about war, he wanted to fight it. That hunger for glory would soon lead him to his defining moment. Years of service under Washington built respect and frustration. Hamilton wanted command. Washington said no, again and again. The general couldn't afford to lose him. In 1781, after a minor argument, Hamilton resigned from Washington's staff. It was bold, it was risky, but it worked. That same year, Washington gave him what he craved: his own battalion. Yorktown, 1781. The final act of the Revolution. Cornwallis fortified. the Franco-American alliance closing in, and in the dead of night, a plan: storm the British defences. Hamilton's unit would take Redoubt 10, October 14th, moonless night, bayonets fixed, rifles unloaded, silence. 10 brutal minutes of steel and blood later, Redoubt 10 was theirs. The British lines collapsed. Cornwallis surrendered. America won. For Hamilton, it was more than victory. It was vindication. The orphan had led men into fire and carved his name into history, but the battlefield was just the beginning. Independence wasn't stability. The Articles of Confederation were weak. The states were more like rival countries than a unified nation. To Hamilton, it was chaos wearing the mask of freedom. He pushed for a stronger central government. At the Constitutional Convention, his voice was one of the youngest but most relentless. He wrote the majority of the Federalist Papers, arguing passionately for a system that could survive time. When Washington became the first president, he knew who to trust with the nation's lifeblood: Alexander Hamilton. As the first Secretary of the Treasury, Hamilton faced a bankrupt country. No national currency, no central banking, no public credit. He built it all: national bank, federal assumption of state debts, public credit system, tariffs to build industry. Within years, he transformed economic chaos into structure. He wasn't just balancing ledgers, he was building a country from the ground up. But genius makes enemies, and none were fiercer than Thomas Jefferson. Hamilton's vision of strong federal power clashed violently with Jefferson's dream of rural independence. Their rivalry birthed America's first political parties, Federalists versus Democratic Republicans. And then came the scandal. Summer 1791, Maria Reynolds, an affair, blackmail. Years later, when whispers turned into accusations of corruption, Hamilton did the unthinkable. He confessed. In a 95-page document, he admitted the affair in shocking detail to prove he hadn't misused public funds. It saved his political integrity and destroyed his reputation. The first major sex scandal in American politics left him broken but unbowed. He kept writing, kept building, kept fighting, but the cracks were spreading. Aaron Burr, charismatic, ambitious, dangerous. Hamilton never trusted him. When Burr ran for governor of New York, Hamilton moved behind the scenes to stop him. Burr lost and blamed one man. Letters flew, insults printed. Then came the challenge, a duel. July 11th, 1804, Weehawken, New Jersey. The same ground where Hamilton's son had died in a duel years earlier. Pistols raised, 10 paces. Hamilton fired high, either on purpose or in reflex. Burr's bullet tore through him, shattered ribs, broken spine. He died the next day at 47. The man who built America's financial foundation died broke, bleeding, and whispered about in scandal. But his story didn't end in that grave. Eliza Hamilton, shattered but unbroken, saved him. She preserved his papers, defended his name, founded an orphanage in his honor, remembering the boy he had once been. Hamilton's ideas endured: national credit, federal power, the balance between liberty and law. His fingerprints are still on the Constitution, the Treasury, and the very idea of America as a union of ideas, not blood. For a century, his name faded. Then a biography revived it, and a musical turned it into a phenomenon. More than 200 years later, the orphan from the Caribbean is once again shaping minds and inspiring millions. Hamilton once wrote, "What is a legacy? It's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see." He never saw the America he dreamed of, but he planted the seeds, and they're still growing.